the other mercies that you have bestowed on us, we ask in your Son's name, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, sir. Apologies for absence? No apologies. I wish to welcome everyone here, members present, technical team here from the Auditor General's Department and the Ministry of Finance. Welcome P.S. McIntosh from the Ministry of National Security and her team and the representatives from the Jamaica Constabulary Force who are here. We will begin as usual with the reading and confirmation of the minutes before we get into the main substantive issue of the day, which is the performance audit report by the Auditor General's Department on procurement management within the JCF. Members should have received a copy of the minutes, and I will go through page by page, beginning with page 1. Page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6. Madam Clerk, on page 6, in the final paragraph, there's just a typo there. The word resolves should be resolve. Yeah. Page 7, page 8. On page 8 in the first paragraph, in line 4 where it says the WOG sets out, it should be the WOG business plan sets out. On page 9, in the third paragraph, the final line where it said the chairman noted that the world was moving towards the use of electric cars and asked whether this was part of the energy sector. I think that was supposed to say electricity sector because we were talking about a specific target for use of renewables in relation to electricity. So the question was whether the electric cars will count towards that target. So I think it should be the electricity sector there. Page 10, page 11, page 12, page 13. Subject to those 3 amendments, would someone care to move for the adoption of the minutes? They were very comprehensive and accurate, as usual. Yeah. Moved by Member Phillips, seconded by Member Guy. Thank you. So the minutes are adopted with those, subject to those 2 amendments. In terms of matters arising, members, on page I think it was on page 8 of the minutes, there was a reference to a market study to develop the feasibility of floating a diaspora bond for which a consultant had been contracted to do the market study, and we had asked the head of the PIOJ, Dr. Wayne Henry, who that consultant was, and he said he would have to get back to us. Well, he has. There's an email. You may have, there's I think a couple of copies of it that have been tabled. Essentially, from him to the clerk of the committee indicating that the consultancy was put to tender. It's a marketing study to facilitate economic investments by the Jamaican diaspora, to determine whether there's a market for diaspora bonds, the likely targets for potential investors in diaspora bonds, where they are and what would motivate them to invest, and the best structure of the bonds to ensure success. And he says that after the consultancy is complete, it's anticipated that a comprehensive marketing study to guide the successful execution of an institutional framework to promote, coordinate, and organize economic and social investments by the diaspora will be delivered. And that is apparently one of the sub-recommendations of Growth Initiative 8 of the Economic Growth Council's call to action, which is Growth Initiative 8 is harness the power of the diaspora. Anyway, ultimately, he says the floating of any bond is within the remit of the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. The consultant selected is Lions Head Global Partners, UK, and they apparently subcontracted Home Strings Inc. of the USA. He says that the contract commenced in March this year. An inception report has been submitted, approved, and paid for. An interim report on product options was produced and provided to the government of Jamaica in August of this year. And the technical feasibility report is now due. So that's the information that was provided on that matter arising. I don't think there are any other matters arising. So we will move now to the matter, the substantive matter for the day, which is the, as I said earlier, the performance audit report on procurement management within the Jamaica Constabulary Force. This report is dated April 2019. And members, we have additional documentation. We have the usual PAC briefing report, which we call the prompt, and we also have a copy of a letter from the Permanent Secretary to the committee clerk dated July 17th, 2019, in which the findings are listed and management's response is provided. I guess the prompt is the summary of the main issues. So what I would do is invite the representative of the Auditor General's Department just to give us a quick overview of this particular performance audit report, and then we'll get into the prompt.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Good morning, members, representatives from the JCF and the Ministry of Finance. Thank you. We would have conducted our performance audit between 2018 and 2019, April 2019. Our report highlighted cost savings achieved by JCF arising from internal controls of fuel usage, and in fact also from the initiative undertaken with the Ministry of Finance for the provision of bulk purchases for fuel. That would have also added. We, however, noted that advanced planning could have enabled the use of competitive bidding methodology to get better value for the contracts related to some areas of the operations, example, police uniforms, meals for detainees, repairs and maintenance. We were not, however, in receipt of the documentation that would have enabled verification of the responses post the tabling of this report, and those would have been noted for issues 1, 2, and 5. However, I am certain that we will get some elaboration as the meeting progresses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lulim. So we can go straight into the prompt. Yes. Emma.
Yes, just before we delve into the details, just from an overview point of view, I just want to get a sense from the AG's department whether just the fact of consuming less fuel, or the JCF utilizing less fuel, is an indication of efficiency, because it could mean that less vehicles in the fleet are operational. It could feel less patrols were being done. I really wanted to get at some other measure than just an absolute reduction in the volume of fuel purchase to really make some objective assessment. Have we tried to graph this against, miles patrolled, or the size of the operational fleet in a relative period that we're comparing it with, etc. Just to look up, because I don't think just an absolute reduction in fuel consumption by itself is an indication of improved operational efficiency. So I'm trying to get a sense if you had any other measures of that.
Well, we would not have had access to the data in terms of the number of vehicles out of service, although we would have been informed that there were a number of police vehicles that would have needed repairs and would have been off the road. But what our measure really was looking at was the benefits that would have been derived in terms of, because the savings are what they are in terms of the bulk purchases and the special arrangements made in terms of the discounted price, right, which would have been demonstrated in table 4 of the report and table 4 and 5 of the figure 4 and table 5.
What page?
Yeah.
What page is figure 4?
Okay, page. Okay, let me get you the exact page.
Table 5 is page 26.
Right.
Figure 4 is.
And figure 4 is page 28. Right.
Right.
And our chart on
Page 26
page
and
28. And then our chart on page 29 would have alluded to the control mechanisms that were in place that would have enabled some of those efficiencies to be achieved. That would have included our review of the tank capacity register, the refueling transaction receipts that would have been received from the JA system, and that would have led to some measurement of a fuel efficiency ratio. But
Table 5 is an analysis of savings under the framework agreement,
yes.
which is an agreement with the marketing companies which provide discounts to government
Yes.
purchases of fuel.
And the simple methodology used would have been, we would have had the average cost per liter of fuel without the discount. The discount is about $5 per liter. So when you take that away from the cost per liter for each of the years, and then you would have multiplied that by the quantity purchased, you would have got a new value, which when you look at the difference between what it would have cost you with or without the discount, you would have got those savings. And we would have accumulated the value for the 5-year period, which would have given you over 10 billion in savings.
Just a follow-on to that. The $5 discount is against what benchmark? Is discounted against what benchmark?
Sorry.
You spoke to a $5 discount per liter, and it's discounted against what benchmark?
Well, we would have received the cost, we would have had the average cost for each period of the fuel for each of the years.
The average cost in the market?
The average.
What's the benchmark you're using?
Yes, the cost that the JCF would have purchased had they purchased at the market price compared to the discounted price. But we actually would have looked at those vehicles in terms of the warehouse. We would not have had it for all the years for us to do an appropriate calculation in terms of all of the benefits.
So the $5 discount only applied to the bulk fuel.
Right. But for retail, it's 95%, as an average 95% of the retail price as well that they would have been paying. No. They would have got, no, I'm saying they would have had savings on average about 95% of the retail costs, which would have been in table 5, that we would have looked at those savings on page 26. So it varies. On average, it's about 95%. In some instances, it would have been over maybe about $117 million, $1,000, sorry, that would have been. Right, but we would not have had an opportunity to validate the new methodology.
Thank you. So, I think we could just look at issue 1.
And just to add also, Chair,
yes,
that we would have actually seen an increase in the number of vehicles in service, and actually seen a reduction in the fuel consumption. So that would have been indicative of some efficiencies. It may be related to the type of vehicle, yes, but at the same time, the internal controls would have assisted in that regard.
There's no data on the increased number of vehicles, though. We just have data on fuel purchases and imputed savings.
Yeah. For the number of vehicles that would have been in service, we did not get data for 16, 17, and I think 17, 18, but we had for 13, 14.
Members, please. Both of you. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, that's an unfortunate remark, and I'm sure you aren't minded to pursue it any further.
Chairman, you didn't hear that, sir. It is an allegation by the member.
She nodded.
And it was a side-talk between both the member and the staff. And the staff did not find it offensive. They were just conversing. So it is very sad that my good friend can now move it into the frame of things here now to highlight it as if, say, some abuse is taking place.
Members.
Exactly. We need to focus, man. You need to get out of the...
Member, please, let's move on from this. If you will. So issue 1. Issue 1 is related to what we've been discussing, but the specifics of it are as follows. For the 5-year period from 2013-14 to 2017-18, the JCF realized total savings of $427 million from the purchase of retail and bulk fuel under a framework agreement between the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service and petroleum marketing companies. The price of fuel supplied to the JCF for government-owned vehicles is discounted by the marketing companies based on the framework agreement. The JCF operates 6 bulk storage facilities in Kingston and St. Andrew. We noted that bulk fuel purchases declined sharply to 184,000 liters in 2017-18 from 764,000 liters in 2013-14, which is a huge reduction. That can't be an efficiency-based reduction. There must be more to it than that. The JCF partly attributed this to the reduction, to downtime experienced at 3 of its bulk fuel locations due to repairs. So that was part of the reason for this sharp reduction, that 3 of the bulk fuel locations were out of commission due to repairs. goes on to say, JCF, as part of its fuel conservation activity plan, action plan for 2017-18, had considered the expansion and modernization of bulk facilities, especially in police divisions where the larger amount of its fleet is assigned. 25% of its vehicle fleet was assigned to Kingston and St. Andrew, 14% to St. Catherine, and 10% to St. James. However, the expansion and modernization initiative is yet to materialize. So we are seeing here that there's an action plan for fuel conservation, which was contemplating expanding and modernizing bulk facilities in the more in the police areas, divisions where there is greater usage of its fleet, or most of its fleet is assigned. However, that initiative is yet to materialize. Management's response: the expansion of bulk facilities was not pursued because of findings of the cost-benefit analysis. The areas analyzed were acquisition and installation costs of fuel pump and storage tank, human resource needs for implementation and management, and environmental concerns and compliance. Based on the span of operations, it is more favorable to purchase retail fuel, considering the benefits under the framework agreement. And then the verification comment is the JCF is yet to provide evidence of the cost-benefit analysis for verification. So you have an action plan for fuel conservation that is seeking to expand and modernize bulk facilities. That was your action plan for 17-18. But in response to the failure for that to materialize, you're saying that it wasn't pursued because of a cost-benefit analysis, which has not been produced for the Auditor General to look at.
Chairman, before you go
yes,
there,
Dr. Guy.
that's a little clarification I need. Thank you. This speaks to a reduction, and Member Bunting earlier spoke to, and as indicated here, a reduction from 764,000 litres to 184 over a 5-year period. So it means therefore that, am I to understand that this reduction is from what was usually contained in the bulk facilities, but at the same time the JCF was getting that amount from the retail arm of it, because certainly you're not using only 184,000 litres of fuel per year. So most of that would be coming from the retail arm. And the second part to my concern, and possibly question, Chairman, was if the JCF was buying in bulk, couldn't they also be part of, get the benefits from part of that framework agreement that was negotiated with the petroleum companies? That's the point I'm making, because I mean, there are two aspects to buying in bulk. Either you buy it from the supplier, which is Petrojam, and you would get it at a cost which does not have the markup of the marketing companies, or two, you can buy it in bulk at the rate you'd get it from the retailers and have it in storage in your own facility. So the cost-benefit analysis would depend on where you are purchasing it and the costs that you'd save vis-a-vis what it would cost you to expand your facilities, repair the pumps or whatever that would be needed. As this is indicated, they have not yet provided, so that also needs an explanation, as you have indicated.
Yes, so I'm just a bit perplexed that you would have developed a fuel conservation action plan for 2017-18, which contemplated modernizing and expanding the bulk facilities, especially in the areas where you use most of your fleet. But that has not been pursued because you now have done a cost-benefit analysis that indicates that it's more cost-effective to buy it on a retail basis. but we haven't seen that cost-benefit analysis. And neither the Auditor General, one wasn't produced. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I think it would be helpful if there's a lot of reference to this framework agreement and the discount on a framework agreement. Maybe the PS could, or one of the officers could explain just what is the price that this 5% discount is benchmarked against. Is it something independent of the marketing companies like the Petrojam published rack price, or is it something that against a notional price that the marketing companies say they would have otherwise paid? I mean, you know, in marketing, you know, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors when it comes to discounts. Companies are known to put up prices sometimes before they have sales, so that the discounts bring it back very close to the original price. All I'm trying to figure out if there's an objective sort of third-party benchmark against which this 5%. So if it was if the Petrojam ex-refinery price, for example, was used, which marketing companies don't influence, then that would give you an objective benchmark to say whether this discount is real or it's notional. So that's the first thing I'd like to understand. In the framework agreement, what is the 5% discount against? What is the benchmark that is discounted against, the benchmark price? And secondly, I'm sure the JCF or the ministry can tell us on this table where we see the number of vehicles per year. On table 3, page 27, which has the second column says fleet number
Figure
in the
figure 3.
Sorry, figure 3, which has but it has a table within figure 3, and the heading is fleet number. And I assume that this figure is just the number of vehicles in the fleet rather than the number of vehicles that are operational. So I'm sure somebody like Mr. Stewart could tell us for each of these corresponding years the average number of operational vehicles, although I know that fluctuates from week to week. So
we have 3 questions. One is the question I was asking, which is, how is it that price, ex-refinery price, what is the 5% applied to? And the third is in relation specifically to figure 3 and the number of vehicles in the fleet number. Does that, assuming that is the total number of fleet vehicles, what was the actual number of vehicles, I suppose, on average, in service and in use during those periods? So there's 3 different issues. Perhaps you could just speak to the first one, PS, or if you want to delegate that somebody else. The question as to how is it that you had an action plan contemplating the expansion of the use of bulk fuel, and then that hasn't been implemented because it turns out that something else, going the route of buying it retail is more cost effective because of the framework agreement and the 5%.
Thank you. Morning. Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning again, everyone. Just allow me to make one comment. This is my first appearance at PAC, so I'm not sure the protocols. I would have thought I could have got an opportunity to introduce my team, so I would like to introduce my team.
Please go ahead and introduce your team.
So I have with me DCP Acting Richard Stewart, ACP Warren Clark from the JCF, also Ms. Claudette Martin, who's the PFO, Mr. Devon Cahoon, and from the Procurement Group, Mr. Glenn McLeish, Mr. Douglas Walker, and from the M&S Chief Technical Director, Mr. Delroy Simpson, and myself appearing. Thank you. At some point during the deliberations, I also, which I circulated, had a few opening points that I had wanted to make in context of this report, but if that is not how it goes in PAC, then
I don't have an issue with it. I didn't know about it. I haven't seen that. It wasn't.
Yeah, I just circulated.
Or just
In
me?
other committees, I have given the opportunity to, make
Yes,
some
ma'am. You can
comments,
go
so-
ahead and make your opening comments.
So,
If that's what you'd like to do. We wouldn't stop you.
And then we can, so yes, thank you very much again. Just wanted to comment that we have accepted the findings and recommendations of the Auditor General and have since used the report as the basis for a paradigm shift in the approach to and the fact of how procurement is being undertaken in the JCF. And in this regard, as a central theme throughout our response to the report, we indicated that we have embarked on a strategic procurement transformation initiative under the sponsorship of the Permanent Secretary and the Commissioner of Police. We have responded individually to each finding, indicating by way of updates instances where fixes have already been made, and in other instances the steps we were taking to address the issues raised in the Auditor General's report. I take the opportunity also to indicate that in many areas of the JCF's institutional response, we have referenced the report and offered early stage view of our approach to resolving many of the issues raised. For example, in the report finding number 3 on page 17 of the report, we addressed the matter of disconnect between JCF's annual operating plan and associated procurement plan, and our resolve to correct this as part of the transformation initiative, and the same is true for other findings, 4 and 5, and other areas of the report. I just want to raise that based on the work done in the aftermath of the report, we have found weaknesses in the organizational arrangements, in the systems and processes that inform and undergird the procurement operations. And for example, our review has showed that the Special Procurement Unit in the JCF has, one, a narrow profile with some core procurement functionalities not included, that is research and sourcing, business and risk analysis, compliance and standards, vendor analysis, procurement process management. We also don't have an organizational structure, which is also lacking in these core areas, and these positions are not on the establishment. And over the past 3 years, you would have seen 16, 17, 17, 18, 18, 19, a total value of procurement of $12 billion, for which we do not have the capacity nor capabilities and competencies to manage. However, we approach the initiative transformation under 3 distinct integrated constructs: people, structure, business, operating processes, systems. And we're in the early stages of implementing the initiative, transformation initiative, and aim to have a fully performing procurement function characterized by a better organizational structure, establishes competencies framework, compliance functionalities, business processes that have been fully integrated. In the interim, we have made changes to effect improvements in a number of areas of procurement operations. We have reviewed and decided to acquire prisoner meals through the open competitive tender processes, and our tender documents are being prepared for circulation in the 4th quarter of the current year. In the procurement of bulk and retail fuel and efficiencies in use through initiation of a fleet management system that will track mileage and gas consumption. With significant underinvestment in police facilities over the years, we have completed a full and comprehensive assessment of all police stations with a repair program on schedule, and we are soon to implement a more rigorous management maintenance regime. A new organization and structure has been drafted for the procurement unit, and we have to sit and discuss with the Ministry of Finance and Public Service on that. We have also established a process library. We have documented the 10 procurement methodologies, 26 sub-processes in the form of business process flow diagrams. And we have created clear terms of reference to guide the scope of functions and the governance operations of the entity's procurement and evaluations committee. And we have identified the gaps in the core competencies and capabilities required for the procurement unit of the JCF, and the training programs which should be sourced to close those gaps. Importantly, the programs represent a combination of web-based and in-class sessions, therefore with great flexibility to the team. So these are some of the things I wanted to raise in context of this report and to demonstrate and show that we have responded, we have accepted in general the recommendations and some of the errors and the findings, and have, as an institution, taken to respond to it. So the High Command is here today, and we are happy to continue the discussion and especially start off with the 3 questions. I will ask ACP Clark if he would like to address in particular those 3 areas which are under his remit.
Thank you, PS McIntosh, and we can have some further discussion on where you're heading in this regard in due course, but if we could just
Thank you.
have those questions addressed, it would be helpful. So the first one was really to do with the action plan that is referred to in our briefing report for 17-18, which had looked at the expansion and modernization of bulk facilities, especially for those police divisions where most of your fleet is assigned. And then that was not pursued, apparently, because of a cost-benefit analysis. Perhaps you could tell us a bit more about that.
Thank you, Chairman, members all, good morning. With regard to question 1, in terms of the action plan that appears not to have been pursued, my appreciation of this plan had to do largely with attending to 3 or 4 bulk locations that were down. Critical locations at Elliston Road, the then Mobile Reserve, and the Marine Division. And so we were very concerned about these facilities being down, and the plan of action surrounded getting these facilities back up. And they are up and running now. In respect of the examination of possible or increasing bulk locations, and the data is still being assessed, is that when we looked at the business, where 40% of our fleet is concentrated around Kingston, St. Andrew, and St. Catherine, 60% of the fleet are in the rural parishes. Except for St. James, we thought that the fleet bulk locations outside of Kingston or the corporate area would not be cost effective. One, because of the distances that you would have to travel to get to the pumps. And so at first view, we thought that it was not a very good idea. So we really concentrated on installing modern pumps and upgrading those facilities that were down. If I may progress to the framework agreement and...
ACP Clark, before we move on, just for clarification, with the bulk fuel purchases for when you buy in bulk, who do you buy from? Do you buy from marketing companies, or do you buy directly from Petrojam for the bulk facilities?
Marketing companies, Chairman.
All of your fuel is bought from marketing companies,
yes,
whether it be at retail petrol stations or whether it be bought in bulk. And
yes,
does the framework agreement basically apply to all of those purchases? Both the retail and the bulk purchases would benefit from the framework agreement and the pricing in the framework agreement?
Yes, they do. But I have to say that it is the Ministry of Finance that intercedes on our behalf and does the negotiation of these rates.
Right. Does the negotiation of the framework agreement?
Yes, they do.
Right. I see.
And for all of government, that is.
Right, for all of government, that
Yes.
is. Okay, you were going to answer the question, I think, of how the 5%.
Well, that is really, that's
Yeah.
the issue.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to point
Go ahead.
out, that it is the
Minister of
Minister of
Finance.
Finance that is able to speak properly to that.
Right, so you're not really in a position to
No.
comment on that particular detail as to what the benchmark that the 5% is applied to.
We're not.
Okay.
So, Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Doctor.
if what we're understanding is so, and I have no doubt
Yes.
to doubt the ACP, the JCF having a bulk storage facility does not redound to their benefit at all, except probably just access on site. Because it is the same retail price they're buying to put in the bulk storage so that they can offload it to their respective vehicles. So that's what I'm getting. So therefore, is that
ACP, what is the concept behind bulk buying is usually because you get volume discounts and the efficiencies of pricing that provides. Is that the case here? Is that why the bulk buying policy, the 4 facilities, 3 of which were being repaired and have since been repaired and so on, what is the idea behind your bulk fuel program?
Efficiency of operations. That,
Yes,
meaning,
be a bit more
meaning
specific.
access to petrol on a 24-hour basis during national disasters, during times of crisis. You know, that is a priority for us because we have relied on the Ministry of Finance to do the business, to work the percentage and those.
But there's no price advantage. It's really
I'm
just
not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure. It's not usually my remit to.
Are the payments for fuel handled by the police or by the ministry? How is the fuel purchased?
There's a JAA system that is also set up by the Ministry of Finance. And so yes, we pay to the marketing companies on using a system set up by the Ministry of Finance.
But you draw a check from your account and pay or transfer from your account directly to the marketing companies.
Yes, yes.
It's not the ministry that deducts it from your warrant or whatever.
No, we pay.
You pay.
We pay.
You're not sure whether there's a bulk discount part from a pricing perspective. That's really the ministry's concern.
But if you don't understand the pricing mechanism, how do you know that what you're being billed and what you're paying for is consistent with the pricing mechanism?
Because we have relied on the Ministry of Finance to determine what the rates are.
Right, but I mean, have they transmitted to you what these rates are? When you get an invoice, you've consumed 100,000 liters of fuel for this month, and here is the invoice for it that you're paying against.
Yes.
Don't you reconcile that against whatever the framework agreement prices should be? I mean, you must have some independent
Does the
check
Ministry
of
of
that.
Finance have to sign off on the invoices and approve them for payment, that they're consistent with the framework agreement? Or is that just left to you to deal with?
It is my understanding, sir, that the Ministry of Finance sets the tone and the lead in the framework agreement, and the JCF responds by paying the companies directly for the use of for fuel.
Yes, but the question arises, who verifies that you're being invoiced in accordance with the framework agreement? So if the framework agreement has a provision that bulk fuel is to be priced in a particular way as opposed to retail, that different discounts apply, if that was in there, we don't know whether or not it's in there because the ministry has dealt with all that. But when you get invoiced, who confirms that the invoices comply with the framework agreement?
Because we're monitored, the business is monitored by Ministry of Finance. It's done by a web portal that Ministry of Finance has access to. We have a terminal, and so the invoices and what we are supposed to pay are viewed through this web portal.
Do you know whether it's actively monitored by the Ministry of Finance? The payments and the invoicing, they have access to the portal, as do you. But do you know whether they're actively interrogating that to make sure it's compliant, or you're not sure?
Well, yes, we believe that they do. In fact,
Ministry of Finance is there.
Yeah, DFS Blake is here.
We have limited access to the portal because it's really finances.
Blake, you wanted to comment on that?
All right. In terms of the agreements, as it is said, the framework agreements are done by the Ministry of Finance on behalf of the government of Jamaica. The negotiations are with the marketing companies. So it's not the ex-refinery price that is considered, but we'd get it at a lesser price than what would be sold at the pump. The monitoring, what we look for is variances. So there is an agreement, and generally speaking, everybody pays that price. Through your advanced card system as well, it is monitored for variances.
Do you know whether the bulk purchases are priced differently to the retail?
There is a difference, yes. The bulk price is different.
Yeah. All right.
Just going through the report, because as AG's report says that there's a savings, right, and there's a reduction. But I'm trying to still gather where is that saving, because yes, you're saving because of that framework agreement, but there's a reduction in quantity, liters purchased. So if you're looking year to year, you're using less, but what would be interesting is to find out why are we using less, both on the... Which is why they still haven't answered the third question, which was... because vehicles are operational in each year.
And if you look at it from the 16-17 to 17-18, is a 746,000 liter difference between the 2 years. Yeah? But your fleet numbers, well, it went up marginally, and the same with the bulk. So is it that we have less number of vehicles in operation, or how is it that we're using less in this instance? Is a question to be asked.
ACP Clark?
Yes.
Yes,
sure.
so we have the data before us indicates that the volumes of bulk fuel fell quite dramatically over the 5-year period.
65,000 liters less.
From 764,000 to 184,000 roughly over the 5-year period. So there's a trending down over that time. The fleet numbers that we have seen in this table have gone up from 1,455 up to 2,271. So that's a substantial increase, around 800 vehicles more. And then the retail quantities have also dropped. So both the bulk and the retail have fallen, while the fleet numbers have increased. Could you just comment on what's behind that pattern?
All right, thank you. Whereas you notice that there is a fall in the bulk fuel purchases, although the pumps were down, there were alternate retail purchases. For example, the pump at the Marine Police, that was down. In order to fuel the boats, we had to go to gas stations or did retail. So we did consume fuel, albeit not by bulk, but by retail. We believe that the savings are legitimate and significant because of the internal mechanisms that we implemented. For example, the we did first we tightened up on the once a day fueling, and although it started in 2011, what we found is that a high number of vehicles had defective odometers. And so we tightened up on it. We tightened up in that we made great efforts in ensuring that these odometers were repaired. The significance of the odometers is that when the odometers are defective, then the control slackens. So those vehicles were allowed to not to conform with the one fuel a day.
The odometers measure the mileage of the vehicle,
right.
How far it's traveled. Yes.
Yes.
So it ought to correspond to fuel use. But if it's defective, it can give you a reading that if they've done less driving when in fact they've used a lot more fuel, and maybe who knows what's happened to that fuel. So yeah.
But who monitors that and manages that system? For you to be able to catch that within a week or a couple of days?
Well, we have a system that is managed essentially out of the Transport Maintenance and Maintenance Division, Management and Maintenance Division, and they have agents in every division called transport officers that sees the vehicle every day and make checks.
So you're saying to me, then in St. James, it's 133 vehicles that you have here. I'm looking at the pie chart in Figure 3 on page 27. So that transport manager sees those 133 vehicles every day before they go to refuel?
Well, the transport manager in St. James is situated at Freeport, that has the bulk of the fleet. But the station commanders are also proxy transport managers. And so whereas he coordinates the management of vehicles, yes, he sees most of them, and those that he can't see, it depends on the sergeants or inspectors.
Let me tell you where I'm getting to. Because you have a system and it works somewhat.
Yes.
But in your response, you had 3 of your bulk fueling dispensing your pumps down.
Yes.
Eh? And you would have augmented that by going to the retailers.
Yes.
But the retailing numbers, even with your bulk going down, did not increase over the previous year.
Yes.
It went down. And your total quantity over the previous year was also down by 1,000, call it about 9 million liters less.
Yes.
Yeah? Or 900,000 liters less. Right? So,
perhaps if we could hear what is the average operational size of the fleet during these periods, it might help.
Yeah, which is what I'm trying to get, because you might not want to say it in here because of the whole national security issue, yeah? The size of the fleet. But
the size of the fleet is already here.
Well, this is here, but what is operational?
What is operational, and this is history, so it really won't affect.
Because that's the only way you're going to know if you're actually saving. Because how many vehicles actually out on the road and not parked, and what is your consumption of fuel that you're using, which would really give you if you're actually saving. Because you're looking basically what you're spending year to year, but actually your fuel consumption is down when you still have the same amount of vehicles in your fleet.
All right. So ACP Clark, you were taking us through the one purchase a day arrangement, which you said commenced in 2011, but there were a lot of defective odometers on the vehicles, and you've been trying to tighten up that. We are asking you to just, if you could explain how it is that the overall, whether it be bulk or retail or a combination, volume of fuel that you're buying has been falling while your vehicle fleet has been increasing.
Well, thank you, Chairman. So there was a raft of internal mechanisms, and that was one of them. We made effort to ensure that those vehicles with defective odometers were sorted out. We also improved to 20% of the fleet appreciated to be less than 5 years. So we had newer vehicles. Because of the input of newer vehicles that were more efficient. And at this point, it's 20-25%.
Just explain that statistic. So you have 20 to 25% of vehicles, or we were saying whether, and you said 5 years. So what's the relationship between those two things?
No, we're saying that we, as a target, we want to get 100% of our vehicles, police vehicles, to be no more than 5 years.
Currently you're at 25%?
And currently we're about 25%.
Right, okay.
Right, and because of this appreciation, we know that they would be using fuel more efficiently, right? New vehicles being added to the fleet would improve efficiency by itself. We also implemented a fuel ratio by ascribing to each vehicle, based on the age, the number of miles that are to be traveled per 1 liter of fuel. Had some teething pains, but we found that it was a way of spotting vehicles that were using too much fuel, vehicles that were idling too much, and so we were able to action this, reducing idling and making sure that those vehicles that could be maintained were in fact maintained. Another control that we implemented was just insisting that service mileage parameters were strictly adhered to.
In that, please?
Pardon?
Could you explain what you mean by service mileage parameters?
So for example, various models have servicing times, like 5,000 miles per month, as the case might be. We ensured that we conform to the manufacturers.
In terms of how frequently you service the vehicle?
In terms of how frequently they were serviced. And because we were doing this more efficiently, naturally we saw that per vehicle, less petrol was being used.
And in terms of your fleet, your operational fleet, before I get to you, soon come to you, Member Davis. In terms of we have some data on the number of the fleet numbers in the respective years. The question has been asked: is that the total number of vehicles in your fleet? Is that what's in that data? And how does it compare with the actual average operational vehicles in the fleet in a given year? Because those will be the ones that would be consuming fuel, not the ones that are not being used for one reason or another. Well, do you have that information?
Well, Chairman, I hope that you'll allow me to say that some of the numbers here are boarded, because as we get new boarded survey.
Oh, some of the fleet.
Because a part of the strategy is that as new vehicles come in all we have to cut the fat. So those vehicles that are not efficient, we apply for board of survey. So as we got vehicles
boarded vehicles included in this number?
Yes.
As part of the fleet?
Yes.
Why?
Because there's a process.
They have to, until it's boarded, they have to include it. But, Mr. Chairman, I happen to know TNR does a regular report that shows how many, the total number of vehicles, less the vehicles to be boarded, less the vehicles that are non-operational, to give you an effective operational fleet at any given time. And from memory, you know, that operational fleet was significantly less than the total, based on vehicles that were to be boarded and vehicles that were down. So this is the figure I'm trying to get, Mr. Clark, from your team. Do you have that figure? Is anybody from TNR or whoever TNR reports to here that would be able to give an indication of what that figure looked like for these
as at year
years?
end, I suppose.
Yeah, well, corresponding to these years, yeah.
Well, I don't know. This must be a figure as at a point in time or an average.
Well, at the same point in time then.
But we can provide the data at a later time. Or you don't have it? No. Speculate.
Also, while Mr. Clark consults, he described a system of the transport liaison persons. But my recollection is that the JCF used an advanced card system for each vehicle that gave you an analysis of the fuel consumption for each vehicle. I mean, granted, if the odometer wasn't working, it would be a faulty analysis. But that in itself would have been a way to flag a vehicle if it was appeared to be, you know, consuming a lot of fuel, or the mileage was getting very poor. These were all tools that could be used without having to go out and do a physical inspection of a vehicle, just from the analysis that was provided from the advanced card system.
JAA
That's the
system.
right, Jamaica Automobile Association.
So there are two issues that you could address. If you have the data on the actual number of vehicles in the fleet that are operational as at the same date points as are in this table, that would be helpful. So we'd have an idea of when we see the volume of fuel moving in a particular direction, how does that compare to the actual number of vehicles that were consuming fuel? That's one. I don't know if you have that data. And the other was the use of the advanced card system as a tool for trying to improve fuel efficiency.
All right, I'll take the second first, Chairman. So, yes, the advanced card system is heavily relied on to assess fuel efficiency. In fact, the fuel efficiency ratio system that we put in could only be managed by technology, by IT, because it is this system that prevents sometimes a vehicle from being fueled if it is deemed inefficient. Because once we set the ratio, if we believe that the vehicle is inefficient, then fuel, it will not pay at the gas station when it gets there. So I say again that the advanced system is heavily used in that.
And do you have the data on the fuel, on the fleet size in terms of operational fleet size? Do you have that data?
I do have the data on the fleet size, Chairman, but I would like to recommend that it is not stated publicly. I do have the data. It's essentially...
It's historic data, isn't it?
It's a start, but it's very close to the present position.
You say overall that trend in terms of the fleet size is, as a percentage of the total fleet size, is it increasing? Is it decreasing over the period?
Well, as you're saying, because we have been getting new vehicles, we have really not been able to board the vehicles as efficiently as we would like to have them. But sufficing to say that we have taken old and inefficient vehicles out of service. Some.
So you're not comfortable sharing with the committee the data on the actual volume of vehicles being used from year to year, because it's hard to really get a feeling for whether, to what extent fuel is being consumed more efficiently if we don't have that parameter to consider. We have the volume of fuel being utilized, we have that data, but we don't have the volume of vehicles using it.
As I said, Chair, and I understand where the ACP is coming from, but that's the only way we as a committee will know if we're actually saving or not. So,
but we can provide the data.
Did the ACP say he was uncomfortable? He started with question 2 first, but he didn't come back to question 1. I'm not sure, is it that he just hasn't gotten around to sharing it with us, or whether he's uncomfortable, he doesn't have the figure? I'm still not clear, because it would be keep coming back to this. Do you have a figure for the operational fleet in these years? You said you.
So I do. Chairman and members, this was studied empirically by the Auditor General's Department, and when all were considered, they came to a deduction, and so they know what the figures are and what the operational figures are.
No, Mr. Clark, are you going to give this committee those figures or not? That is simple, yes or no. Don't tell me about the Auditor General's Department. Are you going to give us those figures or not? And if not, why not?
If you would allow me, sir, I had stated that we can provide the information. Yes,
we'll provide that information.
Yes.
Okay.
Will you provide it, Ms. McIntosh?
We can forward the information to you in another few days, a week before the next sitting. There's just an apparent discomfort to disclose openly.
I see.
Which you can appreciate. So, but the data can be discussed too.
1 second. The Auditor General's Department has just suggested that we have a quick look at pages 28 to 29, and in particular paragraphs 3.20 and 3.21. I don't know.
Mr. Chair, may I just add one thing, though? We had requested the number of vehicles that were not in service, but at the time of the audit, we were told that they were compiling the numbers. We did not receive those numbers. So we would not be able to say of the fleet how many vehicles were functional or in the graveyard, if you would want to call it that.
But I just wanted to get from the AG's department, when you say savings, are we looking at the consumption year over year and what is being paid?
Yes.
So come back to our original point now. Are we actually exactly?
We were not measuring efficiency. No.
It's just dollar savings, but not efficiency, which is what we are trying to find out from them now.
Precisely.
Yes.
But having said that, when you see the volume going down and the fleet size going up, and ACP Clark saying that there's been some amount of attempt to improve the stats around what percentage of the fleet is comprised of vehicles of less than 5 years old, it does indicate that there should have been some efficiencies realized over the period. We just can't assess that because we don't know what the fleet size really was, the operational fleet size really was. But you've identified various measures that you've been pursuing that would have contributed to trying to reduce inefficient use of fuel.
Chairman.
That's basically where we are. Yes, sir.
On that last point, and I'm jumping the queue ahead of my colleague here. ACP, can you speak to the oft-reported incidences in the media where there are reports that police vehicles are not used always for operational purposes, and sometimes you find that they are at the houses of spouses and otherwise are gone on errands not related to police duty but related to policeman duty or woman. How effective has that particular area been monitored as part of the new process to improve the efficiency, to get value for money, to ensure that all of or most of what is being spent on police operational matters.
Do you use vehicle tracking, for example?
Well, I'll defer to DCP.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We're in the process of acquiring some tracking devices that will assist us in better identify where the vehicles are. But separate and apart from the use of technology, what we have done, consistent with what ACP is saying, is that we are relying on tighter management systems, people managed systems in the divisions, using, as I said, manual technology for the time being. But we are well advanced in getting that piece of equipment that will help us to identify where they are.
Mr. Stewart, I'm going to suggest that these manual systems have not worked in the JCF historically. I'm not sure why I believe it will now, but the technology exists. And Mr. Chairman, I can tell you for many years, the ministry has been trying to get the JCF to put in these tracking things. And I can't say the JCF has embraced it with enthusiasm. And I can share with you some information that many years ago, a company donated vehicles to the JCF that had trackers installed, but the drivers were not aware of it. And there were days when the vehicles left the station and never reached the patrol route at all, completed the shift and went back to the station. And the technology showed that the vehicle never arrived at its designated patrol route. So this manual tracking is not going to yield you very good results. There commonplace technology exists to have vehicle tracking systems, having geofencing, having alerts for, all various types of things. Why has the JCF been so resistant? Because to my certain knowledge, for at least 6 years, the ministry has been trying to persuade the JCF to install these trackers.
Vehicle tracking is a fundamental part of fleet management for any large motor vehicle fleet.
So, Chair, let me just state that we are about to go to Cabinet with this very system for approval to procure. About
to do the implementation, or you're in a procurement process?
Procurement.
You're in a procurement process.
Last step of procurement. Yeah.
Okay.
Members, can we move on to the next issue?
Yeah. But just one more question. Well, it's a general question on procurement, not on the fleet itself. There, Mr. Chairman, many years ago, but before even my time as minister, there was a move in the GSCF towards civilianization, I think it was called, of a number of the functions, the finance, the procurement, a number of the HR, a number of these areas that did not require somebody with police training, and in fact would benefit from specialists, manning those areas. Can the PS just tell us where we are in terms of that process? And also maybe one of the ACPs could say what is the strength of the GSCF now? And I know how it has moved over time, but what's the strength now? The strength, they have an establishment and they have a strength. The strength refers to the actual number of personnel, police personnel they have. The establishment is something like 14,000, I forget what it is, but they've always struggled to get up to the establishment. So the strength gives you the real indication of the boots available to be deployed. And then of that strength, a significant number are deployed in administrative type assignments, which is why the civilianization was intended to free up many of the trained investigators, operational personnel, etc., to be able to do the work that only police officers can do, and allow a lot of the administrative functions to be performed by civilians.
Yes, I mean, ACP Clark, maybe you could comment on the civilianization process, where you are with that.
I will comment.
Yes, yes.
Right. So, as you know, we've been following this. I think it's 2008 report. Right. And for some time, there's been a kind of slowing down, but the civilianization process has begun, and in fact, this report from the Auditor General has helped to convince the powers that be, or the systems, or even the JCF, how important it is. So the special procurement units that I spoke about, and the new organizational structure does speak to civilians, specialized persons, and so there's a notion from the Commissioner's Office and High Command that there's a mixture of uniformed and civilian personnel in key positions. But it takes a time, as you know. Change of this nature is not so easy to achieve, but opportunities exist, and in reports like this, to state the fact that the time is now. So this is where we're.
By the way, this has been about over a decade. We've been talking about this. So in terms of taking time,
it is.
We've been talking about it for a long time. But the strength.
Right, sir. Up to the ending of October, we had 11,355, approximately. 1,355, that's JCF, and District Constables, 2,065.
Okay. So, just from memory, at the last economic and social survey that was published, it's about the same 11,400 roughly. It was at the end of December 2018. So you're even making my point more dramatically, in that you have not been able to increase at all, and it looks like a slight decrease in the JCF personnel available. So it's whoever we can free up, whoever the uniformed or the trained JCF personnel that we can free up from doing administration to doing police work, must improve the effectiveness, or should improve the effectiveness of the JCF's operations.
There's two ways, because as ACP Clark was discussing the numbers, I was thinking, when you're trying to analyze the most optimal way of utilizing fuel, and between bulk and the logistics of where you use vehicles and so on, I'm just thinking police expertise and training is a totally different field to that kind of analysis of economics and accounting and so on. And so you'd think that significant benefits stand to be derived from having expertise in those areas within the force, so that those things are done by persons who are really trained and competent in that, and at the same time freeing up the best policemen to deal with police work.
Yeah, what is interesting, the Auditor General reminds us in Appendix 1, what are the building blocks of value for money. And the first one is economy, keeping the resources costs low. All we've been talking about in terms of the fuel is keeping the costs low. We're spending less, but it's not addressing the other building blocks, which is the efficiency and the effectiveness. And, the effectiveness ultimately must be how well the police is doing in reducing crime, and in particular violent crime. And although we're spending less in terms of fuel, we're not seeing, in fact, we're seeing poorer outcomes. So this is not necessarily contributing to the efficiency or the effectiveness of the police force. And it would seem to me that one thing that we could do fairly quickly is to increase that efficiency, or that effectiveness rather, is to get more of the trained police personnel from behind desks and get them out onto the street or into the stations behind administrative desks, and hire civilians to do a lot of those jobs, since we seem unable to grow the strength of the GACF in spite of this being an objective for a number of years.
Sir, if I may though.
Yeah.
I'll just give you some examples of what we have done in terms of the civilianization program. The entire legal department, which was police, is now civilian. The communication units, those are being civilianized. And the human resource branch is civilianized. The entire corporate services and support section of the organization is civilianized. So what you have spoken of, sir, is happening. Finance too is completely civilian. So what you have spoken
the call center is civilianized?
For the most part, there's a mix.
There's a mix.
So
if you were to add all those departments you've just told me, what would it be in sort of numbers, just to get a sense? Is that 100 persons, 200 persons? Do you have any? Just ballpark.
Do you have data as to how many civilians
the civilian workforce is 2,000. Yes.
Is that
2,000, but that includes people like gardeners and
yes,
and office attendants and that sort of thing. Well, in the rural areas, you have to keep the stations and the facilities maintained and the grounds. So you may not have a lot of gardeners in
Mr. Chairman, how long have this practice been taking place? The civilization?
About 10 years.
Oh.
Yeah.
And you find it working?
It is working.
What is it that you think you could do to enhance what is actually on the ground now?
Well, one of the things that we do, we have done, is to ensure that we have the job specs, the jobs properly spec, the specifications properly done, the job descriptions, and then you look at those to see which of those you can really just hand over to the civilians to have them done. There are some instances where we maintain a few police personnel just for operational reasons and for the experiences that they can offer. But outside of it, we have considered fully and have gone as far as we believe we can go in terms of civilizing the force.
So you think that the departments that are manned by civilians, do you think that it is where you want to be and that you would speed it up to get them in a place to make sure that they take sole responsibility for those departments?
Sorry, did you say that it's gone as far as it can go?
No. No, we are going as far as we can go in terms of the civilian program.
You're going as far as you haven't got there yet.
No, not yet.
But what I want to ask, Mr. Chairman, is it that you're taking it in a systematic approach to it? You have a level at which you move, or is it that we could just speed it up and get it to that point so that we will find the effectiveness more adaptable?
Well, let me give an overall picture. So as we have been moving on the changes across the entire system, like technology changes and more high-end specialized types of changes, then this is the opportunity where we use to integrate the civilian and the uniformed groups. So that is happening. And I go back to this report as an excellent opportunity for that. So with a new draft organizational structure, more specialized procurement units, and that has come out of this report, opportunity to then move the force with a more specialized type of procurement approach.
Is it anticipated that the procurement unit that is being built out will be substantially civilian?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, Member Jackson.
I've been checking very long.
My question is just a follow-up on Member.
Go ahead, Member Witter.
Yes. It's a follow-up on the concern raised by Member Bunting with respect to you not being able to increase the numbers. I would love to know what are some of the challenges that you face that you are not able to satisfy the number as it relates to the establishment of 14,000 or thereabout. What are some of the challenges that you face?
One of the constraints, I think the major one, has to do with capacity, just physical space. As we stand now, it is the National Police College out by Twickenham Park, and that is conducting the basic training at this point. However, we are actively looking additional capacity. We are in negotiation with persons for probably for lease or possible purchasing of additional training sites.
Is one of your concern?
Yes, one of the major limiting factors.
Major concern.
Factors.
What about
attrition? What about attrition?
Yes, I was going to that. Yeah. What about attrition? Your attrition rate?
Attrition meaning persons,
persons
leaving the force.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I understand the attrition. All right, so the major separation from the organization comes from retirement. I have some figures if you'll just spare me a few minutes to quickly look at them. Yes, we're losing about 500 per year, but no, generally.
How much of that would be from retirement?
And the majority, I'm thinking, we're probably looking at about 60 to 70% in retirement, and then the next sizable portion comes from resignation. And those separated by it.
What about the issue of
So, if I might just complement what you're saying by saying that's why the focus has been on building a stronger welfare regime, improving the conditions of work, and the situation under which they operate in physical situation to help with that, minimize that attrition.
Yes, and what about the issue of interest as it relates to persons wanting to join the force?
You have a high demand of persons who would like to join, because many people want to join and can't get in. I'm aware of that.
Yes, I'll affirm that, sir. That's the situation.
Jackson, you wanted to say?
Yes, sir. I want to pick up. I have two other questions I want to pick up from the last point. But before I comment, Chairman, just permit me to convey to the leaders of the JCF who are here, ACPs, Stewart and Clark, my sympathies for your colleagues that you have lost, particularly George Lawrence from Montego Bay, whose son got killed a few days ago. Mr. Lawrence, was just recognized by the Montego Bay recently for his outstanding crime-fighting contribution over the years, and generally sympathies to the persons who have lost their lives in the recent wave of murders. And particularly, as I mentioned, Montego Bay is one of the areas where we have a state of emergency. And in fact, a number of other state of emergency areas over the last couple of days, we have seen tremendous increases in the daily murder levels. So please accept my condolences to your colleague in that regard. Chairman, ACP Clark, you mentioned about the effort to increase the efficiency. Have you looked at the type of vehicles that are more fuel efficient as a consideration for your choice. Some years ago, I think it's during Minister Bunting's tenure as minister, there was a short listing of motor vehicles that they would use, and I think that was more from an operational efficiency standpoint, more so than probably fuel, yes, and how compatible they were to the terrain, Jamaican terrain that they have to use. Do you use, my specific question in that regard, do you use fuel consumption of the vehicle as a critical parameter in assessing the choice of motor vehicles? And secondly, in that regard, which of the motor vehicle makes you have found to be most efficient during this exercise of assessing motor vehicle gasoline efficiency use? That's the first question, set of question, and then I'll go to one for Ministry of Finance.
Do you consider fuel consumption in deciding what vehicles you buy? Is that one of the criteria you apply or not?
Oh, yes.
And which vehicles have you found that give you the best fuel efficiency?
Well, it's definitely one of the considerations for procurement. I know that in a previous Auditor General report, there was a recommendation to keep the variation of models to the minimum. Chairman, earlier in our discourse, I spoke to an effort by the JCF to minimize its fleet to below 5 years, because in our experience, a new vehicle is a new vehicle, and we find that when vehicles are new, there are not much variations in terms of its efficiency per CC rating. And so, whereas we have not gone into particular models, we know that we have not seen any great variation between new vehicles. Whereas there are other differences and characteristics that we find suitable for policing in terms of fuel efficiency. You know, all modern vehicles are at their best when they are new.
On that point, Chairman, I won't say it openly, but off the record, ACP Clark, yes, I will raise it with you, but there's one particular make which I understand that they are gas guzzlers. But in the event it is not correct, I'm not going to openly say it here, but I'll speak to you off the record to verify that.
I had wanted to, we've only dealt with issue 1 and it's nearly 12 o'clock. I'd wanted to push on.
Let me just, the second question, Minister of Finance. Regarding the fuel purchase, my curious question, in the arrangement that Ministry of Finance has negotiated, why didn't they not make the arrangement to purchase at the ex-refinery rate from Petrojam? Because in the case of JUTC, I'm aware, some time ago, they were purchasing from JUTC, from Petrojam. That was discontinued because of the arrears that was built up by JUTC, and Petrojam, for their economic viability, they terminated that. I don't get the picture that the marketing companies from whom you are purchasing, there's a payment issue, and that not being the case, why not optimize the savings from Petrojam, given the volume that is being purchased, and consistently?
Right. As you say, it used to be like that. I think when the status of Petrojam had changed, it affected how we negotiated. But it's probably something that we'll have to consider. That's basically what's the problem.
Right. Moving on. There is the next issue in the prompt relates to linkages between the annual operational targets and procurement. And the point is essentially made that there was a disconnect between the two. Apparent disconnect between annual operational plans and procurement plans, which limited the force's ability to schedule the acquisition of goods and services on a timely basis and achieve value for money spent. Consequently, we were unable to determine how the force assessed its performance relative to target or effectively allocated budgetary resources. Due to poor planning, this force made multiple purchases of uniform material and entered into contracts for the manufacture of uniforms, utilizing emergency and direct contracting methodologies for 61% of transactions, totaling $623 million, depriving itself of the ability to obtain uniforms at the best available price. This practice by the force neither provided the confidence nor evidence it acted with the intention to receive the most economical outcome. The force could have used the limited tender methodology among pre-qualified suppliers, which would have provided the opportunity not only to encourage transparency in the awarding of contracts, but also to benefit from its advantage as a bulk purchaser through a competitive process. The force agrees with those remarks. This is their response, and notes that as part of the procurement transformation project being led by an external consultant, which includes review of business processes, structures, and systems, when completed and recommendations implemented, should lead to the resolution of these issues. Additionally, an ERP system, remind us what that stands for, that acronym ERP?
Enterprise Resource Planning.
Enterprise Resource Planning
System.
Planning system, which integrates budget, finance, goods and services, including a procurement module, are also being sought. So essentially what we're being told here is, yes, this has all been pretty bad, but we're going to be we have this procurement transformation project which is going to sort it all out. Members, so what we see is that 61% of the transactions involving the manufacture of uniforms for the force have been done through emergency and direct contracting methodologies. And this is largely, or has a lot to do with the fact that your annual operational targets don't find their way into your procurement planning. So you're not planning procurement to meet your operational plan. And then you're doing all this emergency contracting to buy things like uniforms. And this is very inefficient, and you don't know whether you're getting value for money, essentially. Obviously, that is unsatisfactory and needs to be brought to a halt. Moving on then.
I would just reflect, Mr. Chairman, this seems to be just a habit across the public sector. I mean, recently we heard about at RADA, we certainly came across it at Petrojam, now the JCF, and I think the Auditor General has been kind to say that they haven't integrated their planning, their budgeting planning, and their procurement, because most of these contracts, 81% of these emergency contracts, are for fairly routine things: food and drink, meals for detainees, clothing and uniforms. These are not things that fluctuate very much from year to year. I mean,
they're not responding to hurricanes.
Yes, you know. So I mean,
shock.
It really. I mean, if you probably could achieve 90% of your purchases just from reordering the same amount that you had the previous year, you know, or using that as an estimate. So it's hard to see why something like meals for detainees. But is it, my suspicion is that the provisions or the budgeted provisions for these things are so meager that they probably cannot get persons to respond to a tender. And I don't remember the figure now, but when we were at the Standing Finance Committee, we heard figures for the daily per capita allocation to feed detainees.
It's $300. It's just been recommended to be increased to
Right.
$500, and the
No.
finance has signed off on that. $300 for three meals.
For 3 meals.
Yeah.
Now, probably realistically, if you went out with a tender asking people to commit to provide meals at your, I mean, you know, nobody would take you seriously. So, you know, I think we need to drill down a little bit. I would just like to understand, because I am sympathetic if the JCF is trying to get caterers to tender, to enter into a contract to provide meals over some long period of time at a rate of $300 per detainee per day for 3 meals. You know, that is just impractical.
So, Chair, member, if I can just respond
Please.
to the point.
Please do.
On the 3 areas. As far as I'm getting it from the JCF, and we're reviewing the whole procurement area. Number 1, the budget year is different from the operational year for the JCF. So the budget year from March or April to back to the March of the next year, sort of conflicts is the scheduling is a little different from the JCF's operational year, which is a calendar year. So that is
on that issue, though. Generally, in the public service and under the FAA Act and so on, where planning, operational plans and so on are required, are they not supposed to be in sync with the fiscal cycle?
So that is what I wanted to go on to say, that we recognize this as really brought out in the report to us, and we are now working to align it by having the JCF do a longer operational planning period of 15 months that would then cover the 3 or 4 months in the last quarter, so that they would be more proactive and more prepared and better organized in terms of the procurement plan from their operational plan, more in sync, right? So that is where the changes are happening now. And the second thing is, as the member raised, because they were so under-financed before, I think the tendency for emergency procurement happened as the funding would come in from the warrants over a period of time. Then you just go automatically to clear what you need to clear on an emergency basis. And because of the planning and operational, the procurement and operational plans are not in sync. So that would have caused that type of discord, which we are again moving to changing. If you have a longer operational planning period for 15 months, then that would cover, you know, you'd be able to preempt or be more proactive in terms of the procurement plan. So you're not going to rush off into emergency procurement, because then you'll be able to see what's coming, you know. So those are the changes and shifts that we're making now in the transformation program. Oh, and to the matter of the meals, yes, we are going to go to just tender. What has happened before is when you set the ceiling at 500 per meal, then you don't have the best type of competitive process. You don't have the best type of supplier or concessionaire, you know, coming up front. So now we're just making it.
So it has been increased to $500 now per detainee.
Yeah.
It's been approved, or it has been increased?
I don't know. The report says that it has been approved by finance.
And open it.
It has been approved by finance. It wasn't in the last budget, so it will be coming in the. You're now talking this will be applied for the 2020-21 year?
Yes.
Okay.
It says here that the daily expenditure for meals per prisoner has been increased to $500 following a review and recommendation from the force's nutritionist.
Yeah.
Who must have been a
But
magician.
no, what I'm saying,
and
sir,
was approved by the Ministry of Finance.
right, but what I'm saying, sir, is that we're not, I think that we don't have to be guided by that type of cap, because it's just not feasible. If you go open tender and ask for the best type of arrangement in an open
serious people are
situation,
not going to tender on this type of.
you're going to get a better.
There's just not anything in there for the vendor.
Yeah.
How are you going
So
to approach it?
that's what we're moving to in the fourth
So
quarter.
you're not going to be sticking to this cap then?
We're just going to go open in the and procurement guidelines allow us to be able to do that.
As long as your budget can
Yes,
cover the costs.
Yeah.
All right. I think we can move on to
Chair,
issue 4.
On the same issue 3, if you look at the report, page 21, table 1, because the issue of the uniforms, you can't treat it the same way. Yeah. Right. Because if you look at the direct contracting emergency, $320 million out of a $1.2 billion amount spent between 2013 and 18.
If you look at the other, the only portion that was sent to tender of any kind, limited tender, was 395. The rest of it was through either emergency or direct.
Emergency.
Yeah.
So even though we're going through the issue of the food, but at least that you at least know, because there's a fluctuation in the force and everything. The sizes that you're doing, but on an annual basis, there at least should be. This I would like some explanation on this part, on why it is that we're going that direction for uniforms, which is easier to determine. Madam Pierce, you look at page 21
what's the explanation
in the
as to
report
why,
itself.
Page 21?
Yes.
Yeah, why was the procurement of uniforms not done via a tender process? I mean, elsewhere in the public sector it is. Other agencies put out requests for persons to bid for uniform contracts. It's a competitive process, and there are players in the private sector who bid on a competitive basis for that. Why is the force not able to do that?
Well, I can't speak to what was, but as I said, I'm setting a new context and we are moving in a different direction. And what I explained to you before, that a lot of procurement was done in an emergency way because of lack of a lot of the competencies and functions that did not exist in the unit, for which we are now changing that type of methodology of procurement. So I don't expect us to.
No, but which part of the force dealt with the procurement of uniforms to the force? So
currently we're doing a limited tender now for uniforms, I understand.
Where was the procurement done in the past? Where within the force was responsible for buying uniforms for the force?
Yes, the corporate services section of the JCF.
What services?
Corporate services.
Corporate services.
Division.
Yeah. And what was the reason why they didn't go through a competitive tender process to buy uniforms, to get uniforms made for the force?
Chairman, members, it's historical, but what we gather is that there are oftentimes issues with cash flow that would have placed the force in a position that when the cash was available, there was an acute shortage at that time, which propelled us to get, we needed the uniforms like now. And so that is the kind of background that would have precipitated the direct contracting at that time. Space has said we are moving another direction. We are benefiting from a better cash flow, which permits or facilitates a better planning process for procurement.
Methodology is different.
And yes.
But you know, if you
so
wait till you have cash and then directly procure, I mean, that's very conducive to corruption, that methodology.
Well, that's why the whole system is changing now. That's why I'm emphasizing, which is why I had started with the statement to contextualize.
I know where you're heading, but
I understand where you're going, and we commend you for going there. But this shows direct contracting emergency. It is different from the direct contracting. You know, it's 320 million out of the 1 billion that was spent during that. Well, yeah, value of contract annual, right? 1.2 billion. Yeah, and I understand the issue of the cash flow, right? But when you put something out to tender, and you have a supplier, government, the Ministry of Finance is duty bound to pay that bill, you know. It's duty bound. And my issue is that when you look at even the maintenance of facilities, majority of it is the direct contracting, 181 million out of 504. Now, how is it that we determine that we're really getting value for money, even with the direct contracting, with the cash flows constraints? But these are things that we can, if there was a master plan, as was earlier said, and you were going with your plans on a yearly basis, some of these things we can determine. You know?
Right.
And the cash flow problems of the public sector are not limited to the JCF.
Yeah, to the JCF
but
itself.
But generally speaking, public sector agencies have to comply with the procurement rules. So to see, for example, that only 29,000 out of 504,000 of the contracts for maintenance facilities went to a tender process. The rest of them are all directly procured. Similarly, for the uniforms, only 395,000 out of 1.2 billion went to tender. So I understand that, you know, when you need the uniforms and you have the money, you just go out and buy them. But it begs the question, really, you know, was value for money ever obtained? And was there any intent to get value for money?
That is a question.
Well, can I just add to, in terms of the building part of it, a lot of times we've had to respond to public health closing down stations and had to do emergency repairs, and simply because there was no proper planning process. Now, I went into a statement where I said we did a full assessment this year of all the stations, so we know what the conditions of all the stations are now, and we are going through a much more strategic repair program, so that whole emergency situation should not be catching us again, because we have now a comprehensive. So again, that whole planning thing was just off, but it's being changed now.
But all you need to do now is just bring down the murder rate, and we'll be good.
Yeah, but I understand there's been a lack of preventative maintenance, so they have to respond to emergency situations, and that has been a long-standing issue with the maintenance of facilities. But I want to come back to the uniform and just understand, when you contract for a uniform supplier, are they actually constructing the shirt and the pants, or they're just supplying like the material, and individuals get an allowance to go and get their individual uniform sized? And I'm just trying to understand how that works.
You're wondering, let me see if I can paraphrase the question.
Does your contractor deliver a completed item, the uniform, or do they deliver fabric and people go out and get it made up?
It's both.
It's all of the above.
Both.
So you use both systems?
Both systems. So for khaki, it's a uniform that is delivered and the individual makes them.
No, you mean the material that's
material,
delivered?
the material.
Yes, you get the material and the individual makes it. But for other regular uniform, it's a complete product.
Okay.
The supplier delivers, yes.
Could then, if we moved away from trying to deliver the complete outfit and use the same system you use for the officers or the khaki suit people, wouldn't that improve the efficiency, take away some of the burden from and the lead time for the tendering if we just define the specifications for the uniform and give just material and an allowance to the individual officers to get their uniforms made?
It's something that we could consider, but if you
stimulate
understand
economic growth.
Yes, and I imagine there's quite a, you know, just from a casual observation, there's quite a bit of variation in the you know, different sizes and the proportions. So I'm sure there is a lot of customization that has to be done to the uniforms anyway. So why wouldn't we?
I guess standardization and so on may be a factor, but yeah, it would be cheaper.
Yes, it's a uniform, chairman and member.
No, but couldn't you have specifications that the tailor follows? I mean, your suit doesn't look all that different from my suit. I mean, you know, there must be a way of describing the product, and if you supply the material, then you're not going to have that variation, etc. I'm just thinking, you know, if we can decentralize a lot of these things, it might actually contribute to a much greater efficiency.
So some suppliers offer you a package, you know, where they procure the material and they get it made up and they deliver a finished item for you for a price. So, you know, and some just would supply the material and you have to go make it up. And whether the procuring entity uses one method or another depends on, various factors.
The more centralized you make it, the more complex the procurement task, the greater the lead time necessary, etc.
Centralized, you mean having it all done by one contractor?
Right. Oh. Yeah. And in terms of, as you say, you know, a geographic disbursement of the economic activity, etc. It might, you know, it might be certainly worth looking at.
If you bought the material and gave each constable a tailoring allowance that they go and get it made up, then it would spread the joy amongst many tailors, you know.
Chairman, members, because it's a security situation, we wouldn't want even the materials to be lying about in 100 tailor shops. You know, I mean,
Mr. Clark, with respect, there doesn't seem to be any shortage of
the specification.
There doesn't seem to be any shortage of police uniforms over there under the current system.
No,
so I'm not sure whatever system you're using is working.
No, if that is a bad situation, member, it doesn't mean that we need to stay there. We need to be uniform and we need to do it the correct way. A force of 1,200, we really want the uniform to be the same.
11,000.
It can't be
11,300 and odd.
It has to be the same. You know, that's the real concept of
uniform. No, you're misunderstanding, Mr. Clark. I'm not saying that everybody should have their own style of uniform. I'm saying the JCF could specify what the output is, just as they do for the khaki suited officers. They could specify what the product should look like. But each constable or the other ranks would get their suits, their uniforms custom fitted, and they would use their local tailor to do it.
Yeah.
But it would be against the specifications that the force would distribute to all of them.
So I understand.
So it's not that everybody would be that different.
Anyway, it's an idea worth considering. There security concerns and so on that you've raised, but for the khaki suited persons, that's how it's done.
No,
so,
you see, the khaki suit represents a very small portion of the armed forces or the police force. Uniform, you start wear uniform in training, and in that training environment, you don't have the facility or the freedom to go anywhere. You know, your uniform has to be made and presented to you.
And so the uniform for trainees maybe it'd get done centrally, but for the others, you know, it's something to consider. I don't want to spend much more time on that. Member Dunn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd like to say this question is made to the AG department. I would like to thank you very much for the work that you do and continue to do on behalf of the people of Jamaica. The question I'd like to ask is the procurement process generally. I mean, that allows for transparency, of course, value for money, efficiency, and in most cases try to eliminate the act of corruption. But in your investigations generally across ministries, with all that we see in terms of emergency contracting, limited tenders, limited contracted, etc., do you think the procurement process as it stands now is allowing, my word, persons to circumnavigate the process of tendering because of, one, the inherent delays that the procurement process seems to take, the cash flow situation with some of these ministries, as well as is it a bottleneck for these various different departments to allow for their smooth running? So do you think the time has come for the procurement process itself to be revisited to see if there is something that we're missing out in this?
Yeah. To what extent does the procurement process itself tend to encourage people to circumvent it because its operation is so difficult to comply with?
Well, audits have not really shown the difficulty in terms of the process. What the audits have shown is the absence of adequate planning. And in fact, if entities are using their operational plans to guide their procurement processes, then they would not end up with these extended periods where there is nothing taking place within the organization in terms of the procurement. So it's a matter of using your operational plan and translating that into the procurement process. So you would have had adequate time. I don't think there is an issue in terms of, we have seen an issue in terms of the process itself. What we have seen is a problem in terms of the planning time and this rush at the end of a period. You know, at the beginning of a year, you have to provide your corporate plan to the ministries and to align with your budget. And so that you know in advance, and we would only anticipate that it's for emergency purposes like hurricanes, floods, that you would have something unforeseen. So it's not the process, it's more the planning arrangements that you have within the entities that have more or less undermined the methodologies.
Your question is a broad question across the entire public sector, and it's a good question, but I think given the time we have to just finish this, we can probably raise that issue on another occasion and really have a proper discussion around that. Yeah. But the AG has said they're not convinced that the process is a problem. It's more how you manage it and the planning that's necessary for it to work. Yeah. All right. I'm just going to move to issue 6 because I think we've touched on the others already largely, and this is to do with the facilities register, the facilities maintenance register that was not maintained, which is supposed to have details of the physical condition, functionality, and cost requirements and for the maintenance repair of police stations. So there was no structured routine work plan for repairs, etc. PS has indicated that they have moved to they've done a mapping of the needs of the various police stations and so on. It says here in the response, a facilities management program which will be implemented for the year 2019-20 up to 2022 is currently at the draft stage. This program will supplement the ministry's building management plan. So when is this draft going to be complete and approved? Given that it's supposed to be guiding the current year.
Okay, I'm advised by the end of this month, sir. But let me just add to that, the whole maintenance program has been transferred to the ministry, central. So we have taken the AIA and assumed management responsibilities for all the repair programs. Yes. Yeah.
So if a police station has a problem with a plumbing issue, they will come to you for that?
The minor repairs are done by the police.
The minor?
Yeah.
All right. Members, are there any other questions on this, or shall we just go, can we go to any other business?
Well, since you're disposing of this completely, there was one figure that came up in Appendix 4 that that I just wanted to express some concern about. The AG made some visits to police stations in June 2018, a sampling of 8 police stations. And for example, Halfway Tree, the capacity at Halfway Tree is 90. There were 158 detainees on the date of the visit. There, for supper, they get 1 dumpling. Breakfast is also a dumpling. I'm really concerned that I think we can do better than this.
Some of them had no.
Yeah.
Well, at least there was a dumpling. Quite a few. Denham Town, breakfast not seen, lunch pak choy and chicken, and supper dumpling. Portmore, no lunch not seen, supper not seen, and breakfast tea and peg bread. I mean, I really think this must be some violation of the human rights of these detainees, and I think some more attention, PS, needs to be paid.
Right. So that's why we said this was the context of the $200 a day meal, which we have now moved to, and said we're moving into open tender in January.
So how do you plan to do that? Do you plan to do it by region, by parish? How are you gonna?
By region, sir.
And how many regions are there?
5.
So you'll have 1 caterer for each. Each region will be catered under a contract.
That's a preliminary thinking, but we have to. We're right now in the midst of planning, which I can't. So because we're going to issue tenders shortly, so I don't really want to. We haven't, finalized on scope at all.
Okay.
But definitely it will change, because that is not.
Any other issues you want to raise before
context.
we move to any other business? Any other issues you want to raise? No? All right. Members, in terms of any other business, just to set the topic for the next meeting of the PAC. Now, we have a listing of matters that are before the committee, which is a long listing. But the practice that has evolved or has been approved over time is that until the verifications are provided to the Auditor General, or by the Auditor General rather, we don't take the matters. That's what I'm advised has been the approved process. So they will do a performance audit or other form of audit. They will invite the comments of management on the audit. Those comments are then provided, and then there's a verification that is done by the Auditor General's Department of those comments to see to what extent evidence is provided to substantiate what management is saying. Until those verifications are provided, the practice has been over time that we don't take those matters here. So in fact, I have a list of matters for which there is verification, and it is a much smaller list than matters for which there are reports. So there are actually 5 for which we have verifications, and I would propose, and the clerk has suggested, yes, there's one that the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, there is a Auditor General audit report on procurement management that was tabled in July. And that one is apparently ready and we could deal with that. So I'm proposing that we deal with that at our next meeting. And
the Ministry of Education, Procurement.
Yeah.
But just to go back to the process where
Yes.
the reports have to await the verification.
Yeah,
And this is so this would be a second, when you do your report, you would give it to management with a response within a certain time frame. If they don't respond, I assume the report goes forward regardless.
No, let me explain. When we do a report, it's the post, right? It's the post tabling, right? And that that response actually comes through the office here. And we do once we get that response, because any response we receive during the audit would have been incorporated in the report if relevant.
Okay, so this is the response of the teams that come before the committee.
Yes.
And then you do
as I understand it, the report is done, and before the report is finalized and tabled in Parliament, they are given an opportunity to comment on a draft. So the agency, the MD&A, has seen the draft report, has provided comments.
Right.
Those comments are taken into account to the extent relevant. The report is finalized and tabled. Before it comes to PAC, though, an opportunity is afforded to the same agency to look at the final report and comment on it again.
Precisely.
And then the PACs has, prior to my time, this decision was taken that we are not taking on a matter, we don't review it until the Auditor General's Department has verified, as they call it, the comments of management on the final report, to see to what extent, for example, when they say we fix this, whether there is anything to suggest they've actually fixed it or not. And that's how they come up with their assessment as to whether keep in view, they're satisfied or not, or it's not addressed.
Yeah, but I'm a little concerned about that process, because by the time it gets here, the matters will be so stale, you know. I mean, could we? I mean,
it's a serious resource issue, because there are a whole load of reports which are there.
Right.
But if you were to compare the number for which there are verifications relative to the number of reports, it's a very different number.
Yeah, which is, I mean, I think once a report is complete, I mean, this process can be going on, but I don't think we should say that it can't come before the committee until this whole process of second round response and verification of response is complete. I think that is going to make.
Well, it is for the committee to determine the process that we follow. But our predecessors have seen it fit to adopt that methodology, I'm told, as explained to me. Because, for example, agencies would come here and say, oh, we fixed this, oh, we fixed that. And, and then the question really is why, if everything's fixed, why bother have the meeting? So that is why they adopted this process of verification. But it does mean that the readiness of matters to come to the committees is a much more circumscribed list. And it means, for example, that topical issues that we may want to look at because there's a strong public interest in them, we're unable to deal with. And that is not ideal for us.
Yeah, well, so what I would suggest to Mr. Chairman, perhaps periodically, once a month or something like that, we could just look at the list of reports that have been complete and tabled, but are awaiting this second round process. And if there are anything that I think the members may want to accelerate, then we could ask to bring those forward.
Yes. Well, for example, the RADA report, which is very topical, we would like to be able to look at that. I don't think that verification is ready, as far as I know. I don't think they've even had a chance to comment on it. So the whole process just takes too long, I think, because of the way it's evolved over time.
So, for example, the one that you're speaking about, that we've agreed to take next week.
Education, yeah.
What period would that have covered?
It was tabled, I believe, in July 2019. In terms of the period covered by the actual audit report, that isn't provided in the list, and I haven't seen. The clerk is going to send it to us, so we can read it.
Was that a special audit, or was that sort of one of the 5-year performance audit? That was a 5-year performance audit.
5-year.
Okay. So we'll see that next week.
I mean, it is the committee can determine that it wants to review a matter without going through that process. I was just explaining that that is a process that has been developed over time.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, perhaps in your role as chairman, you could use your discretion to bring to the attention of the committee at any point where there's a matter that might be in the public interest and there is a report tabled and it is, and it would be important or useful for us to examine it rather than wait on the extended process.
Yes, and we have done that thus far in other matters. We have been doing that. And for example, the one on RADA, which is what I had proposed to bring to say to the committee, let us deal with that next. Having heard that the process is not yet complete, plus the PAAC is also looking at RAD at the moment. So I said, well,
let's look at education.
Let's look at education.
I think there's a lot there.
And ask that the RADA people be asked to expedite their comments on the reports and the verification process so we can move to it afterwards. All right? Thank you, members. Date of next meeting. Can we do it in a fortnight?
Yes,
the 19th. All right. Okay. Adjournment.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, PS, and your team.
Thank you.
I'm always forgetting. And we hadn't reached you yet, but the thank yous were about to come. But thank you very much for coming. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies, and thank you also, technical staff, for the support given. And the date of the next meeting is the 19th of this month. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wait, hold on. Colin, hey, what go on? You know, say, I'm on my way to go look about the farm work program. Aye, I love to do that.